What if your crown became a cage? What if your palace walls turned into prison bars? In the brutal centuries of the Middle Ages, from the 11th to the 15th century, power was a dangerous game, and queens often found themselves caught in its deadly traps. Number 1. Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a name that echoes through the halls of history with the force of 1,000 trumpets, was arguably the most powerful woman of the 12th century. She was a duchess in her own right, controlling vast swaths of land in southwestern France, making her an incredibly wealthy and influential ruler before she even married a king. Her first husband was Louis VII of France, a devout but somewhat meek monarch. Their marriage, however, was a stormy affair marked by disagreements and the lack of a male heir, which was crucial for the French throne. Eleanor, known for her vibrant personality, her intelligence, and her active participation in politics, and even the Second Crusade, found the French court stifling. Chroniclers of the time noted her fierce independence and her refusal to be a mere trophy. The marriage was eventually annulled, a rare and risky move at the time on the grounds of consanguinity, meaning they were too closely related. The annulment opened the door for Eleanor to marry again, and this time she chose Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou. This was a lightning-fast engagement happening just weeks after her annulment from Louis VII. Henry was medic, ambitious, and much younger than Eleanor, but crucially, he was a rising star in European politics. Their union was a political earthquake. Eleanor brought her vast territories of Aquitaine to Henry, effectively doubling his lands and making him more powerful than the King of France himself. Within 2 years of their marriage, Henry became King Henry II of England, and Eleanor became Queen of England. Their early years were a whirlwind of shared ambition and the birth of many children, including future kings Richard the Lionheart and John. Historians often describe their relationship as a partnership of equals, at least initially, with Eleanor actively involved in governance and political strategy, often traveling with Henry across their vast continental empire. However, the dynamic between Eleanor and Henry began to sour. Henry was a strong-willed, often tyrannical ruler, and Eleanor was equally strong-willed, used to her own authority. As their children grew, especially their sons' tensions mounted, Henry wanted absolute control over his empire, including Eleanor's inherited lands in Aquitaine. He also had numerous affairs which deeply offended Eleanor, who had once been his partner. The breaking point arrived in 1173 when their eldest sons, Henry the Young, King Richard, and Geoffrey, rebelled against their father, encouraged and perhaps even instigated by Eleanor. The young princes were frustrated by their lack of real power and their father's refusal to grant them independent lordships. Eleanor, who saw her sons as the future of her dynasty and her own legacy, sided with them against Henry II. This was not a minor disagreement. It was a full-blown family war that threatened to tear apart Henry's vast Angevin empire. Eleanor actively participated in the rebellion, raising support for her sons in Aquitaine and even reportedly dressing as a man to ride through the countryside. Though this detail is debated by some historians, when the rebellion faltered and her sons' forces began to crumble, Eleanor attempted to flee, possibly aiming to seek refuge with her former husband, Louis VII, or other allies. However, Henry II's forces were too swift. She was captured near the border of France, likely while disguised in 1174. Her capture was a major blow to the rebellion and a significant victory for Henry. Her imprisonment began immediately. Henry II, furious at her betrayal and her role in instigating the rebellion, decided to keep his queen in a state of indefinite confinement. For the next 16 years, Eleanor of Aquitaine was effectively a prisoner. Her confinement was not always in a dank dungeon. Initially, she was moved between various royal castles, primarily Chinon, Winchester, and Salisbury. Her movements were severely restricted and she was under constant guard. She was not allowed to openly participate in political life, nor could she see her children freely. Henry ensured she remained isolated, cutting her off from her powerful network of contacts and the loyal nobility of Aquitaine. Life in these royal castles, while not as brutal as a common prison, was still a gilded cage. She was given relatively comfortable chambers, likely with servants. But her freedom was gone. She could not send or receive letters without Henry's approval, and every aspect of her life was controlled. This was a profound humiliation for a woman who had once commanded armies and ruled her own duchy. She was allowed out for certain royal ceremonies, such as Christmas courts, but these were always under strict supervision, a public display of her diminished status rather than a true reprieve. These occasional appearances served to remind everyone that she was still queen, but a queen stripped of all power. For years, her sons continued their sporadic rebellions against Henry, often demanding their mother's release as a condition for peace, but Henry steadfastly refused. He knew her release would ignite further unrest. Eleanor's survival during these long years of captivity required immense fortitude. She was a woman of formidable intellect and resilience. While specific details of her daily life in imprisonment are scarce in historical records, we know she endured waiting for the political tide to turn. She outlived her husband, Henry II, a critical factor in her eventual release. Henry II died in 1189, and his successor was their son, Richard the Lionheart. Richard, who had always maintained a special affection for his mother despite their earlier political differences, ordered her immediate release. Her release was not just freedom. It was a triumphant return to power. Eleanor, now a woman in her late 60s, emerged from her long confinement with her political acumen undiminished. She immediately took up the reins of government. With Richard absent on the Third Crusade, Eleanor effectively became regent of England. She traveled across the kingdom, administering justice, issuing charters, and collecting taxes to fund Richard's crusade. She negotiated treaties, settled disputes, and secured England's stability during a crucial period. She even traveled to Sicily to arrange Richard's marriage to Berengaria of Navarre, ensuring the Anglo-French alliance. When Richard was captured and held for ransom in Austria, Eleanor played a vital role in raising the enormous sum required for his release. Personally traveling to Germany to secure his freedom, Eleanor's influence continued even after Richard's return. When Richard died in 1199, her youngest son John ascended to the throne. Eleanor, now in her late 70s, continued to be a crucial political advisor to John, especially in his continental affairs. She secured Aquitaine for him, often negotiating with French barons and solidifying his claim. Her legendary journey across the Pyrenees at the age of 78 to escort her granddaughter, Blanche of Castile, back to France for her marriage to the future Louis VIII is a testament to her enduring vigor and influence. She effectively managed relations with her French relatives and former subjects, ensuring the stability of the Angevin Empire. Eleanor of Aquitaine finally retired to the Abbey of Fontevraud in 1202, where she died in 1204 at the remarkable age of 82. Her life was a grand tapestry of power, marriage, rebellion, imprisonment, and an astonishing resurgence. She was a queen who not only survived the cage her husband built for her, but emerged to wield immense power, leaving an indelible mark on both English and French history. Her story stands as a powerful example of a woman who, despite being stripped of her freedom for over a decade, never lost her resolve and ultimately rose again to shape the destiny of nations. Number 2. Empress Matilda. Empress Matilda's life was a relentless struggle for a throne she believed was rightfully hers. Born a princess of England, the daughter of King Henry I, Matilda was destined for greatness from a young age. Her father, a shrewd and ambitious ruler, arranged a powerful marriage for her when she was just a child. At the age of 8, she was betrothed to Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, making her an empress at a very young age. This marriage elevated her status beyond that of a mere English princess, placing her at the pinnacle of European aristocracy. She lived in the Holy Roman Empire for many years, learning the intricacies of governance and diplomacy, skills that would prove essential later in her tumultuous life. However, fate dealt Matilda a cruel blow in 1125, Her husband, Emperor Henry V, died childless. This left her a young widow still in her 20s without a clear role in the Holy Roman Empire. Her father, King Henry I of England, had also suffered a devastating personal tragedy. His only legitimate son, William Adelin, had drowned in the White Ship disaster in 1120. This meant King Henry I had no male heir, a catastrophic problem for the succession of the English throne. Desperate to secure his lineage, Henry I recalled Matilda to England and in a groundbreaking move declared her his heir. He forced his powerful barons to swear an oath to accept Matilda as their future queen. This was a revolutionary concept for the time, as female rule was largely unheard of in England. Upon her return, Matilda was married off again, this time to Geoffrey Plantagenet, Count of Anjou. This marriage was a strategic alliance intended to secure the southern borders of England's continental territories in Normandy. However, it was not a happy union, and Matilda, accustomed to the grandeur of the imperial court, often clashed with Geoffrey, who was much younger and less refined. Despite their difficulties, they had sons, the eldest of whom was Henry, who would later become King Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine's second husband. When King Henry I died in 1135, the oaths sworn to Matilda were swiftly broken. Her cousin Stephen of Blois, a popular and monarchic nobleman, immediately seized the throne of England. Stephen argued that a woman was not fit to rule England and that the oaths had been made under duress. This act of usurpation plunged England into a devastating civil war that lasted for nearly 2 decades, a period known as the Anarchy. Matilda from Normandy refused to accept Stephen's claim and launched a fierce campaign to reclaim her birthright. Her struggle was not a continuous march to victory. It was a brutal, protracted conflict, marked by shifting alliances, sieges, and periods of extreme danger for Matilda. She faced constant threats, often finding herself trapped, besieged, or forced to flee for her life. These periods of being trapped or under siege constituted a form of imprisonment, as her freedom of movement and action were severely restricted, and her life was in constant peril. One of the most dramatic instances of her effective imprisonment occurred in 1141. Matilda's forces achieved a significant victory at the Battle of Lincoln, where they captured King Stephen himself. For a brief period, Matilda seemed on the verge of claiming the throne. She was proclaimed Lady of the English and entered London preparing for her coronation. However, her stern and imperious manner alienated the powerful citizens of London and many of the nobility who had initially supported her. The citizens, along with Stephen's loyal supporters, rose up against her. Matilda found herself besieged within Westminster Abbey, the very place she hoped to be crowned. The citizens, enraged by her high taxes and her perceived arrogance, attacked. Matilda and her supporters were forced to flee London in a desperate, undignified escape. This incident highlighted her political vulnerabilities and her inability to secure the popular support needed to truly establish her reign. She escaped the city under intense pressure, her freedom snatched away by the hostile populace. The most famous and harrowing episode of her confinement came later in 1141, during the Siege of Winchester. After her humiliating retreat from London, Matilda was pursued by Stephen's forces, led by his fierce wife, Queen Matilda of Boulogne. Matilda's half-brother, Robert of Gloucester, a key supporter, was captured during this conflict. Matilda herself was trapped within Winchester Castle, besieged by Stephen's army. The siege was long and brutal, with food and supplies running low. Conditions within the castle would have been dire, with the constant threat of starvation or capture looming over her. As the siege tightened, escape became Matilda's only option. In an act of incredible bravery and desperation, she managed to flee Winchester in the dead of winter. Historical accounts describe her audacious escape, often differing in detail but agreeing on its dramatic nature. One version recounts her being carried out in a coffin or wrapped in grave clothes to avoid detection by Stephen's soldiers. Another suggests she fled on horseback under the cover of night, disguised or cloaked. Regardless of the exact method, it was a perilous journey, risking capture or death in the freezing landscape. Her escape from Winchester was a near thing, a moment when her life hung in the balance and she broke free from a literal trap. Matilda continued her fight, but the civil war dragged on, exhausting both sides. She never managed to fully secure the throne for herself. However, her ultimate rise again was not through her own direct rule, but through her son, Henry. After years of relentless struggle, Matilda, in her later years, made a crucial strategic decision. She stepped back from the direct military conflict and focused on promoting her son's claim. She devoted her energies to securing his succession, recognizing that he had a better chance of uniting the warring factions. In 1153, a significant breakthrough occurred. Stephen's son and heir, Eustace, died. This paved the way for negotiations between Stephen and Matilda's son, Henry. With Matilda's strong support and political guidance, the Treaty of Winchester, also known as the Treaty of Wallingford, was signed. This treaty stipulated that Stephen would remain king for the remainder of his life, but upon his death, Henry would succeed him as King of England. This was a triumph for Matilda. She had ensured her dynasty would rule England, even if she herself never wore the crown. Stephen died in 1154, and Henry, Matilda's son, was crowned King Henry II of England. Matilda had effectively triumphed, albeit indirectly. She had survived years of brutal warfare, political machinations, and literal confinement, pushing her son to the throne she had fought for. She spent her remaining years in Normandy, deeply respected as the mother of the king, advising Henry II and maintaining her powerful network. She died in 1167, having seen her family firmly established on the English throne, a remarkable legacy for a woman who had faced so much adversity and near imprisonment throughout her life. Her tenacity and resilience in the face of overwhelming odds secured her place in history as a formidable and unyielding figure. Number 3. Margaret of Anjou. Margaret of Anjou was a queen forged in the crucible of war, her life defined by the brutal dynastic struggle known as the Wars of the Roses. Born a French princess, she was the niece of the King of France and the daughter of the King of Naples. Her marriage in 1445 to King Henry VI of England was intended to bring peace between England and France, ending years of devastating conflict. However, Margaret arrived in England to find a weak, often sickly husband in a kingdom already fractured by political rivalries. Henry VI was a pious and gentle man, but utterly unsuited to the demands of kingship. He suffered from bouts of mental illness, leaving a power vacuum that ambitious nobles were all too eager to fill. Margaret, a spirited, intelligent, and strong-willed woman, quickly recognized the need for her to step up. She took on the mantle of protecting her husband's throne and her son's inheritance. She became the de facto leader of the Lancastrian faction, fiercely defending the Red Rose against a growing power of the House of York, symbolized by the White Rose. Her primary rival was Richard, Duke of York, who felt he had a stronger claim to the throne than Henry VI. The ensuing civil war was incredibly complex and bloody, a series of battles, betrayals, and shifting allegiances. Margaret was not a queen who stayed safely behind castle walls. She actively participated in the political and military campaigns, raising armies, negotiating with allies, and inspiring her troops. She was often described as a she-wolf by her enemies, a testament to her ferocity and determination. Her absolute focus was on securing the succession for her only son, Edward of Westminster, the Prince of Wales. Her strong personality and direct involvement in what was seen as a man's world often drew criticism, but it also made her a formidable opponent. Throughout the Wars of the Roses, Margaret endured periods of incredible hardship and danger. She was often on the run, fleeing from Yorkist armies, sometimes with her young son in tow, constantly evading capture. These escapes were desperate and often perilous, as being caught would have meant not only her imprisonment but potentially the end of the Lancastrian cause. and her son's life. One memorable instance saw her and her son lost in a forest where they were reportedly accosted by bandits. Margaret, with incredible courage, convinced one of the robbers to protect them, appealing to his honor. This dramatic escape underlines the constant threat she lived under. A pivotal moment of her direct imprisonment came after the Lancastrian defeat at the Battle of Tewkesbury in May 1471. This battle was a catastrophic blow to the Lancastrian cause. Margaret's son, Prince Edward, was killed during or immediately after the battle, an event that broke her heart and extinguished her hopes for his reign. Her husband, King Henry VI, was already a prisoner in the Tower of London and would soon die there, likely murdered on the orders of the victorious Yorkist King Edward IV. After the crushing defeat at Tewkesbury, Margaret of Anjou was captured by Edward IV's forces. She was taken to the Tower of London, the very fortress where her husband was held and died, and where her dreams of a Lancastrian dynasty had crumbled. Her imprisonment in the Tower was a harsh reality. She was no longer a queen commanding armies, but a defeated leader, stripped of her husband, her son, and her power. The Tower of London was a place of immense historical significance, often associated with political prisoners and executions. While her exact conditions are not as extensively detailed as some other prisoners, she was certainly held in close confinement, deprived of her freedom, and likely under constant surveillance. Her imprisonment lasted for several years. From the Tower, she was moved to other locations, including the Royal Palace of Windsor, and then to the more secure Wallingford Castle. Captivity was strict, designed to neutralize her as a political threat. She was no longer an active participant in English politics, effectively a symbol of the crushed Lancastrian ambition. The Yorkists had won, and Margaret was their prize, a defeated queen. However, Margaret of Anjou did not simply fade away in captivity. Her eventual release and rise again were tied to shifting political landscapes and the actions of others. Her freedom was secured not through her own power, but through a ransom. In 1475, King Louis XI of France, eager to make peace with England and secure his own interests, negotiated the Treaty of Picquigny with Edward IV. One of the terms of this treaty was the payment of a large ransom for Margaret's release. The sum was significant, reported as 50,000 crowns, a huge amount of money in the 15th century. Upon payment of the ransom, Margaret was released from her imprisonment in England. She returned to France, her homeland, but it was not the glorious return of a triumphant queen. She was a defeated widow, her spirit broken by the loss of her husband and son, and the failure of her cause. She no longer had an army, a crown, or a direct stake in English politics. However, her survival of imprisonment, her perseverance through such profound personal losses, and her return to her native land represented a form of rising. Again, she had faced the ultimate defeat and captivity, yet she emerged to live out her remaining years in peace and dignity, something many defeated medieval monarchs did not achieve. Margaret spent her final years living quietly in Anjou, often dependent on her father and later on King Louis XI for support. She never again attempted to reclaim the English throne, recognizing that her time had passed and the Lancastrian cause was extinguished. She died in 1482, an exile in her homeland. While her rise again wasn't a return to regal power, it was a testament to her incredible will to survive, her ability to endure devastating loss and confinement, and to secure a peaceful end to a life that had been anything but peaceful. Her story is a poignant reminder of the personal cost of dynastic wars and the extraordinary resilience of a queen who fought to the bitter end. Number 4. Joanna I of Naples. Joanna I of Naples was a queen whose reign was marked by sensational drama, political intrigue, and accusations that would shock any modern audience. Born in 1326, she inherited the throne of the Kingdom of Naples at the tender age of 16 in 1343, a realm in southern Italy that was a vibrant cultural and political crossroads. Her grandfather, King Robert, had carefully groomed her for rule, But her path to the throne was anything but smooth. She was already married to her cousin Andrew of Hungary, a union designed to secure the succession, but one that was deeply unpopular in Naples. Andrew was seen as brutish and domineering, resented by the Neapolitan nobility, who feared Hungarian influence. Political tensions surrounding Joanna and Andrew reached a fever pitch in 1345. Andrew demanded to be crowned king, not just consort, which would have diminished Joanna's authority. Before this could happen, a shocking event occurred. Andrew was murdered. He was found strangled and thrown from a window of their palace in Avarsa. The brutal act immediately ignited a firestorm of suspicion and accusations. Joanna naturally became the prime suspect. While her involvement has been debated by historians for centuries, some claim she was directly involved, others that she was simply powerless to stop it, or that powerful nobles acted without her consent. The scandal cast a long shadow over her reign. Andrew's brother, King Louis I of Hungary, was outraged by the murder and vowed revenge. He launched a massive invasion of Naples, accusing Joanna of regicide and seeking to depose her. This military campaign effectively led to Joanna's first period of severe restriction and flight, a precursor to her later capture. As Louis's forces advanced, Joanna was forced to flee Naples in 1348, sailing to her territories in Provence, France. This was a desperate escape, an attempt to evade capture and preserve her claim to the throne. She sought refuge in Avignon, then the seat of the papacy, and presented her case to Pope Clement VI. Joanna, known for her sharp intellect and persuasive abilities, successfully argued her innocence before the Pope. She was acquitted of direct involvement in Andrew's murder, partly due to the Pope's political interests in protecting his vassal. To secure her position and finance her return to Naples, Joanna even sold the city of Avignon to the papacy for a considerable sum. Armed with papal support and a new husband, Louis of Taranto, Joanna returned to Naples in 1348. She managed to negotiate a peace with Louis of Hungary, who, exhausted by the campaign and facing the Black Death, withdrew his forces. However, her turbulent reign was far from over. Joanna remarried several times, each marriage bringing new political complications and threat. She navigated complex alliances with the papacy, Aragon, and France, always trying to secure her precarious throne. Her rule was marked by shifting allegiances, rebellions by her own family members, and constant threats from powerful external forces. She was a master of political maneuvering, but even her skills could not prevent her eventual downfall. Her final and most significant period of imprisonment came years later, stemming from a crucial decision regarding the succession of Naples. Joanna had no surviving children from her marriages, so she adopted her great-nephew, Charles of Durazzo, as her heir. Charles, however, grew impatient and ambitious. When Joanna later changed her mind and adopted Louis I, Duke of Anjou, the brother of King Charles V of France, as her heir, Charles of Durazzo felt betrayed and saw his claim usurped. Infuriated by this change, Charles of Durazzo, with the support of Pope Urban VI, launched an invasion of Naples in 1381. Joanna, by then in her mid-50s, was unable to muster sufficient forces to repel his attack. Her capital, Naples, was besieged. After a desperate struggle, Joanna was captured in her Castel Nuovo, one of the main fortresses in Naples. This was not a temporary setback. It was a full-scale defeat that led directly to her prolonged imprisonment. Her confinement was strict and designed to prevent any attempt at escape or further political interference. She was first held within Castel Nuovo, and later moved to the more remote and secure fortress of Muro Lucano, deep in the mountains of Basilicata. Conditions in Muro Lucano would have been austere, far from the lavish courts she was accustomed to. She was cut off from her allies and supporters, effectively isolated. Chroniclers of the period describe her as being held in an iron cage, metaphorically. but her confinement was certainly very real and very tight. Charles of Durazzo intended to keep her under lock and key, ensuring she could no longer pose a threat to his newly claimed throne. Despite her desperate situation, Joanna did not give up. Even in captivity, she was a figure of immense political significance, a symbol of legitimacy for her supporters. Her adopted heir, Louis I of Anjou, raised an army in France and prepared to invade Naples to free her and claim the throne. This external pressure was key to her continuing struggle, even as she was unable to act directly. However, Joanna's ultimate rise again was cruelly short-lived. Charles of Durazzo knew that as long as Joanna lived, she remained a threat, a rallying point for those who opposed him. He could not risk Louis of Anjou succeeding in his rescue attempt. In May 1382, less than a year after her capture, Joanna I of Naples was murdered on Charles of Durazzo's orders. She was strangled, possibly, with a silken cord, an eerie echo of the death of her first husband, Andrew. This tragic end meant that her personal rise to power was not a full resurgence in the way some others on this list experienced. However, her story is still one of survival and resilience. She survived the accusations and invasion following Andrew's murder, successfully defended her claim to the papacy, and regained her throne. She ruled for nearly 40 years, a remarkable feat in the turbulent 14th century, navigating a political minefield of warring factions and powerful external enemies. Her final capture and murder, while tragic, were the ultimate testament to the threat she still posed, even from behind bars. Her legacy as a queen, who fought relentlessly for her throne, survived numerous challenges, and repeatedly returned from the brink of disaster, cemented her reputation as one of the most intriguing and resilient rulers of the medieval period, even if her very last attempt at rising again was cut short by assassination. Number 5. Joan of Navarre. Joan of Navarre, Queen of England, found herself trapped in a medieval nightmare, far stranger and more terrifying than political squabbles. She was accused of witchcraft and attempting to murder the king. Born around 1370, Joan was the daughter of King Charles II of Navarre, known as Charles the Bad, a ruler notorious for his cunning and controversial dealings. Her early life was spent in the sophisticated court of Navarre, where she learned the intricacies of European diplomacy and royal marriages. She first married John IV, Duke of Brittany, a powerful French nobleman, and had several children. Upon his death in 1399, she became a wealthy and influential widow, ruling as regent for her young son. Her second marriage in 1403 was to Henry IV of England, the first Lancastrian king. Henry had usurped the throne from Richard II, and his reign was plagued by rebellions and legitimacy issues. Marrying a foreign princess, especially one from a powerful family like the Navarres, was a strategic move to solidify his position and gain international recognition. Joan brought with her not only diplomatic connections but also a substantial fortune, making her a valuable asset to the new English king. She became Queen of England, a respected and prominent figure at the English court. She was a stepmother to Henry IV's children, including the future Henry V, the hero of Agincourt. For over a decade, Joan's life as Queen of England appeared relatively stable. She performed her duties diligently, maintained good relations with the English nobility, and was a supportive wife to Henry IV, who suffered from declining health in his later years. When Henry IV died in 1413, her stepson, Henry V, ascended to the throne. This transition was initially smooth. Joan, as the Queen Dowager, was respected and granted a generous dower, meaning she received a substantial income and lands to support herself in her widowhood. She lived comfortably, maintaining her own household and enjoying a privileged position at court. She was known to be shrewd with her finances, managing her estates effectively, which sometimes led to whispers of her being overly acquisitive. However, Joan's comfortable widowhood was shattered in 1419 when she was accused of a shocking crime. Henry V, then deeply engaged in his military campaigns in France, ordered her arrest. The accusation was that Joan was involved in a conspiracy to harm him using witchcraft and sorcery. Specifically, she was accused of having compassed the death and destruction of the king by means of sorcery and necromancy. The accusations were made by a friar named John Randolph, who claimed to have evidence of her magical practices. The reasons behind these accusations are complex and debated by historians. Some believe Henry V genuinely feared her due to her foreign connections and her financial shrewdness, which might have made her seem too independent. Others suggest that the accusations were politically motivated, a convenient way for Henry V to seize her vast wealth and dower lands, which he desperately needed to fund his expensive war in France. The crown also saw her as a potential rallying point for disaffected elements within England, particularly given her status as a queen and her connections to European powers. Regardless of the truth, the charge of witchcraft was incredibly serious in medieval England, often leading to torture and execution. Joan was arrested without trial and immediately imprisoned. Her lands and revenues were confiscated by the crown, exactly what Henry V needed. Her imprisonment was severe. She was initially held in the royal castle of Leeds, in Kent, a strong, isolated fortress. Later, she was moved to the more formidable and famously secure castle of Pevensey in Sussex, which stands on a remote island marsh. Conditions in Pevensey would have been grim. She was denied the comforts she was accustomed to as a queen and queen dowager. She was held in close confinement, cut off from communication with her family and former allies. Her household was dissolved, and her personal liberties were completely stripped away. For nearly 6 years, Joan of Navarre endured this harsh imprisonment. She was accused of one of the gravest crimes imaginable. In a deeply religious society, and her reputation was dragged through the mud. The fear of witchcraft was pervasive, and the accusation alone would have been a heavy burden. She had no formal trial, no opportunity to publicly defend herself. Her survival during this period speaks to her incredible resilience and mental fortitude. She was not a young woman, and the psychological toll of such an accusation and confinement would have been immense. She simply endured, waiting for the political climate to shift. Her eventual rise again came in 1422 upon the death of Henry V. The very king who had imprisoned her. Henry V died suddenly in France, leaving his infant son, Henry VI, as his successor. With a child on the throne, a Regency Council was established to govern England. The Regency Council, comprised of leading nobles and churchmen, quickly reviewed Joan's case. Without Henry V's personal animosity and need for her funds, the accusations against her seemed to lose their urgency and credibility. In February 1422, orders were given for her release from Pevensey Castle. The council found no credible evidence to support the witchcraft charges. The friar who had accused her, John Randolph, was himself imprisoned for fabricating the charges, a public acknowledgement that Joan had been wrong. Not only was she released, but her confiscated dower lands and revenues were largely restored to her. This was a remarkable reversal of fortune. She was not only free, but also had her financial independence and her former status as Queen Dowager largely reinstated. Joan of Navarre returned to court, her reputation somewhat salvaged, though the stain of the accusation likely lingered for some time in the minds of some. She lived out her remaining years in relative peace and comfort, attending royal functions and managing her restored estates. She died in 1437 at the age of around 67. A respectable age for the time. Her burial place in Canterbury Cathedral beside her husband, Henry IV, signifies her full rehabilitation and her accepted status as a Queen of England. Her story is a powerful testament to a woman who faced one of the most terrifying accusations of her age, suffered years of unjust imprisonment, and yet survived to see her name cleared and her status restored. A truly remarkable rise again. Number 6. Elizabeth of York. Elizabeth of York, born in 1466, was a princess caught in the maelstrom of the Wars of the Roses, a brutal dynastic struggle that tore England apart for decades. As the eldest daughter of King Edward IV and Queen Elizabeth Woodville, she was born into the heart of the Yorkist royal family, represented by the White Rose. Her early life was spent in the relative security and splendor of the royal court, as her father had firmly established himself on the throne. She was a beautiful, intelligent, and well-educated princess, destined for a politically advantageous marriage. However, the peace was shattered in 1483 with the sudden death of her father, King Edward IV. This event plunged the country into immediate crisis. Elizabeth's younger brother, Edward V, was proclaimed king, but he was only 12 years old. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, later King Richard III, was appointed Lord Protector. What followed was a swift and brutal power grab that sent shockwaves through the royal family and the entire kingdom. Richard of Gloucester quickly consolidated his power, seizing control of the young king and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury. Elizabeth and her younger sisters were with their mother Queen Elizabeth Woodville at Westminster Abbey, which they entered as a sanctuary. This was a desperate move, seeking the protection of the church from the political turmoil outside. While not a conventional prison, living in sanctuary meant a severe restriction of their freedom. They were physically confined within the abbey precincts, unable to leave without risking immediate capture or worse. Their lives were dominated by fear and uncertainty as they were pawns in a dangerous political game. The Queen Mother famously slept on the bare floor, a stark contrast to their previous lives of luxury. This period in sanctuary was a form of effective imprisonment, a desperate attempt to survive a brutal political purge. The situation worsened dramatically. Richard of Gloucester declared Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville invalid, rendering all their children, including Elizabeth of York, illegitimate. This cleared the way for Richard to claim the throne for himself, which he did, becoming King Richard III. The two young princes, Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury, famously disappeared from the Tower of London shortly after. Their fate remains one of history's greatest mysteries, but their disappearance removed all male Yorkist heirs, leaving Elizabeth of York and her sisters in an incredibly vulnerable position. Now, stripped of her royal status and legitimacy, Elizabeth of York and her sisters were still living in sanctuary in Westminster Abbey. This was a terrifying existence. Their male relatives were either dead or disappeared. Their father's legacy was tarnished, and they were at the mercy of their uncle, who now wore the crown. Richard III eventually persuaded their mother to leave sanctuary, promising to protect her daughters. Elizabeth and her sisters then came out of sanctuary and were placed under Richard III's direct care, effectively becoming his wards. While they were allowed to live at court, their lives were closely monitored. They were still restricted, not free to choose their own paths or make their own decisions. They were assets to be married off to secure alliances, but their future was entirely uncertain. Elizabeth of York was the eldest and therefore the most politically valuable and potentially dangerous if she were to marry an enemy of Richard III. The person who posed the greatest threat to Richard III was Henry Tudor, a Lancastrian claimant living in exile. Henry Tudor, through his mother Margaret Beaufort, had a distant claim to the throne. He recognized that to unite a fractured England and secure his own reign, he needed to bridge the divide between the warring Yorkist and Lancastrian factions. The most powerful way to do this was to marry Elizabeth of York, the eldest, legitimate Yorkist heir, despite Richard III's claims. This proposed marriage became a rallying cry for those who opposed Richard III. Elizabeth of York, despite her confinement and precarious position, became the symbol of unity, the white rose that could finally merge with the red rose of Lancaster. She was fully aware of the stakes and the potential of this marriage to not only secure her own future, but to bring peace to England. Letters and historical accounts suggest she was keen on the match with Henry Tudor, seeing it as her best hope for freedom and stability. Her rise again began with the Battle of Bosworth Field in August 1485. Henry Tudor, supported by many disaffected nobles, invaded England and defeated Richard III, who was killed in battle. Henry Tudor was crowned king. Henry VII, on the battlefield. His first act of political brilliance was to honor his promise to marry Elizabeth of York. In January 1486, Elizabeth of York married Henry VII. This marriage was not just a personal union. It was a profound political act. It symbolically ended the Wars of the Roses, bringing together the two warring houses. Henry VII, the Lancastrian, married Elizabeth the Yorkist, thereby uniting the red and white roses and forming the Tudor dynasty, which would rule England for over a century. Elizabeth of York was crowned Queen of England. A remarkable turn of events for a princess who had been declared illegitimate, confined in sanctuary, and stripped of her inheritance. As Queen Elizabeth of York fulfilled her duties with quiet dignity and strength. While Henry VII was a careful and often cautious king, always wary of threats to his throne, Elizabeth proved to be a popular and beloved queen. She bore Henry VII several children, including the future King Henry VIII, ensuring the stability of the new Tudor dynasty. She fostered a sense of peace and continuity, embodying the reconciliation of the two houses. She was known for her gentle nature, her piety, and her kindness, winning the affection of the English people. Chroniclers describe her as a calming presence, a contrast to the fierce political battles that had dominated her youth. Elizabeth of York died in 1503 at the age of 37 due to complications from childbirth. Her death was deeply mourned by Henry VII, who rarely showed public emotion, and by the English people. Her legacy was immense. She had survived the disappearance of her brothers, the declaration of her illegitimacy, periods of political confinement, and the terrifying reign of her uncle, only to emerge as the matriarch of a new and powerful dynasty. Her journey from political pawn and near prisoner to Queen of England and mother of a future king is a compelling story of resilience, adaptation, and an ultimate triumphant rise against incredible odds.